The taxi pulled away before I understood that no one was coming for me. It was noon, and the heat came up off the driveway in a way I had missed for the 8 months I was gone. I had one daughter asleep against my left shoulder and one son awake against my right, and a diaper bag sliding down my arm that weighed more than my rifle ever had. 3 days old, the both of them. Iris and Jonah. I had carried heavier things than 2 babies. Nothing I had ever carried felt like this. I got to my own front door and put my key in the lock, and the key did not turn. I tried it twice more, slow, the way you check your work when you already know the answer and you do not want it. The deadbolt was new. The brass was bright and unscratched, the kind of bright a lock only is on the first afternoon of its life. Taped over the peephole, at my eye level, was a sheet of paper in a plastic sleeve, and I could not read it yet because I would not let go of my son to reach for it. A man was walking up the path behind me. He wore a short-sleeved shirt and carried a clipboard and a large envelope, and he looked at a photograph in his hand, and then he looked at my face, and then he looked at the photograph again. "Camille Bramwell," he said. "We have been looking for you for hours." I said yes because it was my name, and because I had spent my whole adult life answering to it the moment it was spoken. I did not know yet that the cruelest word on the paper in his hand would be that same name, written in a signature I had never made, on a document that gave away the house I was standing in front of. I remember the smallest things about that minute, the way you do when your life is dividing itself into a before and an after, and some animal part of you already knows it. I remember that Jonah had a milk blister on his lip that I had meant to ask the nurse about. I remember that a neighbor's sprinkler was going somewhere, tick, 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 in the heat, and that the lawn I had left green in March needed cutting. I remember thinking, of all the useless things a mind can think, that I should have worn my civilian clothes, that a woman standing on a suburban sidewalk in a wrinkled combat uniform with 2 newborns and a dead key looked like exactly the sort of person a story gets told about later. And I remember the man's face changing when he saw mine. He had come expecting to serve papers on a problem, a holdout, a difficult woman refusing to leave a house that was not hers. What he found was a soldier 3 days out of a delivery room, locked out of her own front door, and something behind his eyes understood, before I said a single word, that he had been sent to do a wrong thing to the wrong person. He lowered the clipboard a few inches, as if it had gotten heavier. But let me back up a little. 8 months before the locks changed, my husband kissed me at the curb of our house and told me he was proud of me, and I believed him. It was the first week of March, in the year 2025, and I was 37 years old and a major in the United States Army, and I was leaving for a deployment to a logistics hub half a world away. My job was movement control. I spent my days making sure that the right pallet reached the right aircraft on the right morning, that fuel and food and parts moved across a map in the order that kept people alive. It is not a job that makes the news. It is the job that makes the news possible. Derek held both my hands at the curb. He had gentle hands and a slow smile, and when we married, in the summer of 2018, I had thought that slowness was steadiness. I know now it was something closer to weather. It went whichever way the strongest wind was blowing. His mother was already in the house. Marlene had arrived the night before with 2 suitcases and a box of her own kitchen things, because she said someone had to look after Derek and the property while I was off playing soldier. She stood in my doorway in the March light, 65 years old and straight as a fence post, and she watched me load my bags. "Go serve your country," she said. "I will take care of my son and this house." I heard the word help. I should have heard the word ownership. The deployment itself was ordinary, which is to say it was long and hot and full of small emergencies that only mattered to the people whose lives depended on them. I called home when the connection allowed, usually late at night my time, and for the first months the calls were what I needed them to be. Derek would hold the phone up and walk me through the rooms of our house so I could feel, for a few minutes, like I still lived in it. Then, sometime in the late spring, the calls began to feel different, and I told myself it was the bad connection and the distance and my own tiredness. The house on the screen kept rearranging itself. My reading chair moved to a corner I would never have put it in. The photographs in the hall came down. Once, in what must have been May, though I did not mark the date because I had no reason to, Marlene walked into the frame behind Derek carrying a stack of file folders, and when she saw the phone, she smiled and said, over his shoulder, that she was just getting the household paperwork in order, so nothing fell through the cracks while I was away. I thanked her. I actually thanked her. That is the part I have had to forgive myself for. "You worry about your soldiers," she said that night, Let me worry about the paperwork. I came home in December, and for a while it was good, or it was good enough. Derek met me at the airport and cried, and I believed the tears, and we agreed to try. And trying turned into the twins, 2 heartbeats on a screen in a base clinic in the early spring of this year. I was 38, and I had wanted children for a long time, and I let myself be happy. The pregnancy was hard on my body and easy on my heart. I remember the day we learned it was 2, a girl and a boy, and how Derek laughed and put his hand on my belly in the parking lot of the clinic, and how I thought, foolishly, that a thing this good would fix everything that had felt wrong since I came back. Marlene came to the appointments. She knitted. She rubbed my feet once and told me I was carrying them beautifully, and I let myself believe that whatever had shifted in the house while I was gone was just the ordinary friction of a family, and that a woman who knitted for her grandchildren could not possibly be building a case to take them. I have thought a great deal about how the same hands can knit a blanket and forge a signature, and I have decided that the answer is simply that some people can hold 2 plans at once and feel no contradiction, and that the safest thing you can do is believe the paperwork over the smile. The twins were born on the 3rd of August at the base hospital after a long night. Iris came first and Jonah 7 minutes later, both of them furious and perfect, and I held them and I cried the good kind of tears, and Derek was there and seemed, then, like a father. 3 days later, I was discharged at noon, and no one came, and everything I have already told you began. I did not know that the file folders Marlene had put in order the previous May contained a deed with my forged name at the bottom, already recorded, already waiting, like a mine buried in a road I would not walk down until the day I brought my children home. I want to be fair to the woman I was that morning, because it is easy now to call her a fool. She was not a fool. She was a person who had bought a house with her own name and her own service, and had never once imagined that either could be taken from her by the people who ate at her table. The house was mine. I want to say that clearly because everything that happened later turned on it. I bought it in the fall of 2016, 2 years before I married Derek, on a loan I earned by wearing the uniform, a loan that lived under my name and no one else's. I had signed for it alone in a title office with a pen that did not work until the 3rd try, and I had felt, signing, the specific pride of a woman who had made something solid out of years of moving. That is the past. Here is the present, running alongside it, the way the 2 of them ran alongside each other in my head on the worst afternoon of my life. The present was a concrete step, and the heat and a phone at 19%. I sat down on my own front step because my legs asked me to, and I arranged the twins so that Iris could keep sleeping and Jonah could see my face, and I took out my phone and I texted my husband. Nothing complicated. Where are you? The door is locked. I have the babies. He did not answer. I watched the little word delivered sit under the message and refuse to become read. The Army teaches you to observe before you react. And it is a hard lesson because the body wants to react first and think never. So I observed. I made myself note the time. 17 minutes past 12. I noted the new lock and the plastic sleeve and the fact that the blinds on the front window, blinds I had hung myself, were closed in a way I never left them. Somewhere inside my house, muffled by a wall and a stranger's deadbolt, one of my children who was not in my arms began, faintly, to cry, and I understood with a cold and total clarity that there were 2 babies of mine in this world, and I could only feel the weight of them, not both. I did not knock the door down. I want you to know that I thought about it. I am a strong woman, and it was a hollow door, and I was 3 days out of a delivery room and past the far edge of what a person can be asked to bear. I thought about my shoulder against the wood. And then the other voice, the one the Army spends years building inside you, the one that speaks in a flat calm when everything else is screaming, said the thing it always says. Observe. Collect. Do not give them the version of you they are hoping to film. 2 babies, a dead key, and a house that had, sometime while I was gone, grown a stranger's name across the title. That morning, before any of it, a nurse had asked me who was coming to pick me up. I was sitting on the edge of the hospital bed in my uniform, a baby in the crook of each arm, the discharge paperwork signed, and the nurse stood in the doorway with a clipboard and a kind, tired face, and asked the ordinary question they ask everyone. Who is driving you home? I said my husband, because that was the plan, because that had always been the plan. She said she would give us a few minutes and come back with a wheelchair for the ride down. I texted Derek that we were ready. The little word delivered appeared and did not become read. I waited. A different nurse came. I told her he must be stuck in traffic and I would take a taxi, and I did, because I did not want to sit in that room 1 minute longer than I had to, and because some part of me already knew and did not want to say it out loud in front of strangers. In the cab, halfway home, my phone buzzed, and I thought it was Derek saying he was on his way. It was Derek. The message said, "Don't come to the house. It isn't yours anymore. I'm sorry." I read it 3 times, and the words did not rearrange themselves into anything a person could survive hearing from her own husband. The taxi kept driving toward an address that, according to the man I had married, I no longer had any right to. The paper in the plastic sleeve was a notice to vacate. I read it standing up. Once I had eased Jonah into the car seat the man from the taxi company had mercifully left on the walk. I read it the way I read a convoy brief, top to bottom, looking for the line that would get someone killed. There were several. The first was the header. It was a real notice, on a real form, the kind a landlord tapes to a tenant's door when the tenant has become a problem. Except I was not a tenant. I was the owner. The second line told me why the form thought otherwise. Owner of record, it said, Marlene Bramwell. By quitclaim deed, recorded, dated the 14th of May, in the year 2025. I read that date, and the heat went out of the afternoon. The 14th of May. In the middle of May, I had been in a motor pool 8,000 miles from this door, in a country I am not going to name, signing for a shipment of vehicle parts under a sky the color of a bruise. I had eaten a bad meal that week and joked about it on a call home. I had not, on the 14th of May or any day near it, signed away my house to my husband's mother, because I had been on another continent and because I would sooner have signed away my own hands. Behind me, the chain rattled. The front door opened the width of the chain, and Marlene's face appeared in the gap. And behind her, in the dark of the hallway, I could see the shape of my husband, not moving, not speaking. A man watching a thing happen that he had decided not to stop. "You should not have come here," Marlene said. "You are upsetting yourself." "Open the door," I said. "I want my daughter. Those babies need a stable mother." She said it evenly, almost kindly, which was worse than shouting. "And you are not well, Camille. Anyone can see it. You come home from that war with your nerves in pieces, and you expect to raise 2 infants. Go somewhere. Calm down. We are keeping them safe." There was a woman standing on the lawn next door. Frances, from the Blue House, 60-some years old, a retired school teacher who had brought me a casserole the week I moved in and had waved at me across the fence for 9 years. She had a garden hose in her hand, and she had forgotten she was holding it. "They changed the locks on Friday," Frances said to me, but loud enough for the gap in the door. "I saw the truck. I saw the man do it. I thought you knew." "I did not know," I said. "I told Derek it wasn't right," Frances said, and her voice shook. I said, "That girl is having babies. You cannot do this to her." He would not look at me. I turned back to the gap in the door. Iris was still asleep against my shoulder, and I could feel her breathing, quick and shallow, the way newborns breathe, and I made my own voice as flat and quiet as I could, because I knew that the woman behind the chain was hoping I would scream so she could describe the screaming to a judge. "Marlene," I said, "I am not going to fight you on this step. I am going to ask you one time, let me hold both of my children and let me come inside the house that has my name on the title, and we will talk about whatever you think is happening." "The house does not have your name on it anymore," she said. "You should speak to a lawyer before you say things you cannot take back." "Where is Jonah's sister supposed to sleep tonight?" I said. I meant it as a fact, not a plea. "Where are you planning for these babies to sleep, Marlene?" For just a moment, something crossed her face, and I have wondered since whether it was doubt, or only the calculation of a person deciding a plan was still worth the cost. Then it smoothed over. Derek shifted in the dark behind her. "Mom," he said, so quietly I almost missed it. "Maybe we should." "Go inside, Derek," she said, without turning around, and he went inside, and that single, obedient sentence told me more about the last 8 months than any document ever would. Marlene closed the door. She did not slam it. She closed it the way you close a book you are done with. And the new deadbolt turned over with a sound I will hear for the rest of my life. And my son cried in the car seat at my feet, and my daughter cried behind the wall, and I stood on the step of the house I had bought with my own name, and I did not have a key to any part of my own life. I took out my phone. I did not call anyone. I photographed the door, and the notice, and the timestamp, and the new brass. I photographed Frances, and then, because she asked me to, I let her say her name to my camera and tell it what she had seen. I photographed the deed date on the notice close, so the numbers were sharp. My hands were steady. I have thought a great deal since then about why my hands were steady, and I believe it is because a part of me had already stopped being a wife on that step and had become something older and colder and more useful. A person who builds a case. I had two choices. I could beat on a locked door until my hands bled, and my children learned their first lesson about the world from the sound of their mother breaking. Or I could build something so solid that it would open every locked door in that county, by order, in daylight on paper. I chose the second. It is the hardest choice I have ever made, and I made it standing up, in a uniform with a crying newborn at my feet. The man with the clipboard was still there. He had waited, a little apart, with the discomfort of a decent person doing an indecent errand. "I have to give you these," he said, and held out the envelope. "I am sorry to do it today of all days." Inside was an unlawful detainer summons. Marlene, through a lawyer named Miles Farrow, was suing to evict me from my own home on the theory that she owned it and I was a holdover occupant refusing to leave. There was a hearing date. There was, folded behind it, a second document, and this one took the last of the air out of me because it was a petition suggesting that the children should remain with their grandmother and father while the mothers. And here the word was typed out in a legal font. Fitness was evaluated. 23 hours after I had given birth to twins, someone had sat at a keyboard and typed the word unfit about me. "Sir," I said to the process server, and my voice came out level, which surprised us both. "If that signature on the deed is not mine, who do I tell?" "Not me, ma'am." He almost smiled. "I just carry the paper. You tell it to the judge. You tell it with proof, and you make them look at the proof, and you do not let anybody rush you." He looked at the twins. "My sister went through something, not this. Something. The ones who win are the ones who keep every piece of paper and never lose their temper on the record. You look like you already know that." He meant it as a small kindness, a shrug of solidarity between two people the day had used badly. I took it as a map. Keep every piece of paper. Never lose my temper on the record. Make them look at the proof. "What is your name?" I asked him. "For my notes." "Curtis," he said, and spelled the last name, Dobbs. And I wrote it on the back of the envelope with the date and the time, 12:40 in the afternoon, because I had already begun to understand that in the war I was now in, the ammunition was dates and names and times, and I intended to be the better supplied side. I had nowhere to go. That is a strange thing to sit inside your own chest, standing in front of your own house. I had no family within 1,000 miles. My parents were gone, my father when I was young, and my mother the year before I deployed, and I had built my adult life out of the army and this house and a marriage I had believed in. And in the space of one afternoon, 2 of those 3 had been taken, and the 3rd had proved to be made of paper. I stood on the curb, and I did the thing the army teaches you to do when the plan is gone. I found the next right action, small and immediate, and I did that one thing. The next right action was a working phone. So I called the one number I knew would answer. My phone rang before I could dial. It was Dana. Dana Corliss was a sergeant first class in my old battalion, a woman I had stood next to in more motor pools and more bad weather than I could count. The kind of friend the army makes and civilian life cannot explain. She had heard, the way soldiers hear, through the low, fast network that carries news between people who have shared a tent. She did not ask me how I was. She asked me where I was. "Where are you?" was all she said. "On the sidewalk in front of my own house," I said. "And I cannot get in, and they have the baby's room, and there is a man here serving me eviction papers." There was a pause on the line, and then Dana said, in the flat voice she used when a plan was forming, "Do not do anything I would do. Do everything you would do. I am 9 minutes out." She was there in 12. She loaded both car seats into the back of her truck without a word about the door or the woman behind it, because she understood that the mission at that exact moment was 2 babies, formula, and a place with a lock I controlled. She drove me to a motel off the highway with a kitchenette and a clerk who did not ask questions, and she went out and came back with diapers and bottles and a phone charger and a notebook because I had said, in the truck, that I needed to write things down. "You are not homeless, Major," she said, setting the bags on the little table. "You are between filings. There is a difference, and you know it better than anybody." For the first time that day, someone used my rank as if it still meant something, as if the woman who had earned it were still standing inside my skin. It steadied me more than food. That night, with the twins asleep in a single drawer lined with motel towels, I laid the notice flat on the bed and I began a timeline. In pen, in the small, careful block, letters the Army had trained into my hand. Facts have dates, I wrote at the top of the page because I needed to see it. Facts have dates. Lies get the dates wrong. Dana sat in the other bed and watched me work and did not tell me to rest, which is how I knew she was a real friend, and not just a kind one. She fed Jonah a bottle at 2 a.m. so I could keep writing. At some point she said quietly, into the dark, "You know what they did wrong." "They did a lot wrong," I said. "No, the one thing. They think you are the woman on that petition. The unstable one, the one who comes home broken." She burped the baby against her shoulder with the unbothered confidence of an aunt. "They planned all of this around a woman who does not exist. They are going to be so surprised when the real one shows up with a folder." I wrote until almost 4. I built the timeline of my whole marriage in dates, the way I would build a movement plan, every fact anchored to a day I could prove. Enlistment, commissioning, the closing on the house in the fall of 2016, the wedding in the summer of 2018, the deployment in March. The forged date in May, sitting on the page like a lie that did not know it was surrounded. And at the bottom, the 3rd of August of this year, the day my children were born, and the 6th of August, the day their grandmother taped a stranger's ownership to my door. When I finally slept, I slept with the pen still in my hand. In the morning, I found a lawyer, and I found my old commander, and I began the slow work of turning what I knew into what I could prove. The lawyer was named Gwen Hollister. She had a small office above a bakery and a way of listening that felt like being weighed on an accurate scale. I told her the story in order, the way I had written it, and she did not gasp and she did not pity me, both of which I was grateful for. When I finished, she tapped the deed date with one finger. "A deed is only as strong as 2 things," she said, "the signature on it and the notary under it. If either one is rotten, the whole thing falls. You are telling me the signature is a forgery, and you can prove you were on another continent when it was supposedly made." She wrote 2 words on a card and slid it across the desk. "Quiet title," one said. The other said, "Family Court. We attack the deed here, and we protect the children here, and we do them at the same time. Fast, before their story sets like concrete. I am not going to promise you a result. I am going to promise you a method." She did not promise me anything I wanted to hear. She promised me a method. After the week I had been living, a method was the most beautiful gift anyone had offered me. "Understand what we are doing and what we are not," she said. "We are not going to argue about whether you are a good mother. The minute we argue about that, they win because they have made the argument the subject. We are going to make the subject the deed. The deed is a document. Documents can be proven true or false. A woman's worth cannot be proven in a courtroom, and we are not going to try. We are going to make 12 boring, provable, factual points about a piece of paper, and every one of them is going to be true. And by the end, the judge is going to be angry, and judges who are angry at the right people are the best thing that can happen to a case like yours." I asked her what I could do to help. She told me to do exactly 2 things: keep the children safe and keep collecting paper. "You are already better at the second one than most of my clients ever get," she said, looking at my timeline. "Whoever trained you did me a favor." "The United States Army," I said. "Send them my thanks," she said. And for the first time in a week, I almost laughed. The commander was Lieutenant Colonel Alan Prewitt, who had led the battalion I deployed with, a spare and unsentimental man who had signed my evaluations and knew exactly where I had been and when. I reached him by phone, and I told him what I needed, and there was a silence on the line that I understood was anger held on a short leash. "You were on my manifest in theater on the 14th of May, he said. "You were at the morning briefing. I can put my hand on the roster. I will write it out, and I will sign it, and I will have the personnel shop certify your orders and your travel, so there is a paper record no lawyer can wave away. You were 8,000 miles from that notary major. I will make it a matter of record. No general walked through a courtroom door for me. I want to be honest about that, because I know the story you may be expecting. The one where a man with stars on his shoulders arrives at the last minute and sets everything right. That is not what happened. What happened was quieter and, I have come to think, stronger. A colonel sat down at a desk and wrote the truth on a page and signed his name to it, and that page did more work than any dramatic entrance ever could. The nights in the motel were the hardest part. Harder than the courtroom, harder than the door. Not because of the fear, though there was plenty of that, but because of the ordinary smallness of it. A woman who owned a house was warming bottles in a plastic kettle in a room that smelled of someone else's cigarettes, checking twice that the chain was on a door she did not need to lock against anyone but the people who shared her last name. I would feed the twins at 2 and at 5, and in the long space between, I would sit at the little table under the one working lamp and read my own folder again. And I would say to myself the sentence that got me through: "This is temporary. The truth is not. I built this house on the truth, and I am going to get it back on the truth." Some nights, I recorded a voice memo for the twins to have someday, so that when they were grown, they would know their mother had not fallen apart. I told them, into the phone, in a whisper so I would not wake them, that I was going to fix it, and that they were safe, and that no one was ever going to make me doubt that I was theirs, and they were mine. I have those recordings still. I do not think I will ever play them for anyone. It was enough that on the worst nights, I said the words out loud and heard that my voice did not shake. While the present built my defense, the past kept explaining how the wound had been made. I learned, in pieces, over those weeks, how the signing had been staged. It had not taken a genius. It had taken a kitchen table, a stack of papers, and a notary who trusted the wrong woman. Marlene had a friend of a friend, a notary named Bonnie Alcott, who worked out of a shipping store in a strip mall and stamped documents for $10 a seal. Marlene had brought her a deed, with my name already written at the bottom, in a hand that leaned the way mine leans, close enough, and had told her a sad story about a soldier son and a house that needed protecting. And the seal had gone down on a signature that no living person had watched me make, because I had been asleep in a cot on the other side of the planet. I drove out to the strip mall once later, when it was all nearly over, and I sat in the parking lot and looked at the shipping store with its faded banner offering copies and passport photos and notary services. $10 a seal. It was such a small and ordinary place to have been the door my whole life was pushed through. I did not go in. I only wanted to see the size of the thing that had almost taken everything from me, so that I would stop imagining it as something larger than it was. It was a folding table and a rubber stamp and a woman who trusted the wrong story. That is all most disasters are, up close. I could prove where I was on the day I supposedly gave away my home. 8,000 miles is a hard alibi to argue with. The evidence chain tightened one link at a time, and each link was a small, cold pleasure after so much helplessness. Gwen ordered a title search, and it came back the way I knew it would, and better. The house had come to me alone. By that loan I earned, and the deed of record before the forgery had exactly one name on it, and that name was mine. The quitclaim Marlene had recorded did not just forge my signature. It purported to give away something Marlene had never owned and could not convey, with no money paid, no lender release, no legitimate reason on the earth. "You cannot give away a house that was never yours," Gwen said, reading it. She signed a forgery on top of a fiction. This is not a strong deed with a bad signature. It is a bad signature under a lie, under nothing at all. The mortgage statements told the same story from a second direction. Every month for 9 years, the loan had been paid from an account in my name, funded by my pay, and the lender had never received a request to release its lien or transfer the note, which any real sale would have required. A house does not quietly change owners while the bank that holds the loan hears nothing. The bank had heard nothing because nothing lawful had happened. What had happened was that a woman had walked into a county recorder's office with a stamped piece of paper and had bet that no one would ever check the layers underneath it. She had not counted on a daughter-in-law who kept 9 years of statements in a labeled folder, the way the army had taught her to keep everything. Then came the text, and the text was the thing that told me these were not clever people. They were only people who had never been caught. The hospital had assigned me a social worker when the custody petition surfaced, a calm woman whose job was to look after the safety of the twins, and she was the one who arranged a supervised visit so I could nurse my children while lawyers argued over their address. During one of those visits, in a beige county room with a box of toys nobody had touched, Derek came to hand off the babies, and he was clumsy and guilty and could not meet my eyes. And his phone lit up on the table between us, and I saw, before he turned it over, a message from his mother sitting there in plain gray letters. I told the social worker. She knew what to do. Through the lawyers, properly, By the book, that message and the ones around it were preserved and produced, and when I finally read the whole thread, I had to sit down. The visit itself I will keep for myself, most of it, because it was the first time in 6 days I had held both of my children at once in a beige county room with a box of donated toys and a social worker writing gently in a corner. And there are moments that do not belong in a story about a court case. But I will tell you the end of it. Derek brought the babies in and set the carriers down and could not look at me. And when Iris fussed, he reached to soothe her out of an old habit and then stopped himself, as if he had lost the right, which he had. His phone sat on the table between us, face up. It buzzed. A message slid across the top of the screen in plain gray letters before he could turn it over, and I read it, and my whole body went cold and still. I did not touch his phone. I want that on the record too, because I know the woman they described in their petition would have grabbed it, and I was determined to be in every provable way the opposite of that woman. I told the social worker what I had seen. She knew exactly what to do. Through the lawyers, properly, by subpoena, the messages were preserved and produced, and when the full thread came to me in a stack of printed pages, I read it sitting on the motel bed, and I had to put it down twice. Get the locks done Friday, Marlene had written, 3 days before my discharge. And then, the line I will remember when I have forgotten most of that year. Once she's in the hospital, she will not be able to stop us. They had written the plan down. They had timed it to the birth of my children on purpose because a woman in a delivery room cannot answer a door, and they had put it in a text message the way you would put it in a diary you were sure no one would ever read. People who have never faced a consequence get careless with the truth. It does not occur to them that the paper trail runs in both directions. There was a bad hour in there too, and I will not pretend there was not. Pharaoh sent a letter. It was 3 paragraphs of lawyer, and the middle paragraph invited me to drop my claim to the house and accept a generous visitation arrangement, and it noted, in the flat, threatening way those letters have, that if I insisted on litigating, my clients will be compelled to present evidence regarding the mother's psychological stability following her combat deployment. There it was again, in ink, unstable, unwell. The war did something to her. I read it twice in the motel, and my hands did shake that time, and I sat on the edge of the bed and let them shake, because a body that has been through what mine had earned the right to shake for 1 minute. Then I stood up, and I dated the letter, and I wrote across the top of it, in my block letters, Exhibit 9, and I slid it into the folder with the others. I also did the thing a soldier learns to do that civilians sometimes forget they can do. I asked for help through the proper channels. I sat down with a legal assistance attorney on the installation, a young captain who listened to the whole story with a growing quiet fury, and then told me something I had not known I needed to hear. There are federal protections for a service member's home, she explained. Rules written precisely because people used to wait until a soldier was deployed and could not defend herself to take her house out from under her. A landlord cannot simply change the locks and put a service member's family on the street. What Marlene had done was not just a forgery. It was the exact kind of self-help eviction the law forbids, done to the exact kind of person the law was written to protect. You have more shields than you think, Major, the captain said. Let us hold a few of them up next to your lawyer's sword. She helped me get the certified copies of my orders moved along faster than they otherwise would have. She helped me set up emergency childcare so I could return to my unit without leaving my children anywhere near the people trying to take them. The garrison chaplain checked on me twice. My first sergeant, a man I had known for years, told me that the whole battalion had my back and that if I needed anything at all, I had only to ask. I had come home believing I was alone in the world. It turned out that the family I had built in a uniform was more of a family than the one I had married into had ever been. I was learning that every lie they told needed a person to hold it up, and I only had to find the one who could not. The weakest person holding up the lie was the notary. Gwen subpoenaed Bonnie Alcott and demanded her notary journal, the book every notary is required by law to keep, the log of every document she stamps, with the date and the signer and the identification checked. When Alcott's journal came back, it had no entry at all for a quit-claim deed on the 14th of May. Her stamp was on a document her own record could not account for. A notary's whole worth is that she watched a real person sign. Alcott's book said she had watched nothing. They took her deposition on a Tuesday in a conference room with a long table and a court reporter and a pitcher of water no one touched. I sat at the end. Gwen had told me to say nothing and to keep my face still, and I did, and it was the hardest stillness I have ever held, harder than any position I ever stood at. Pharaoh tried to protect her at first. He objected, and he coached, and he reframed, But Gwen had the journal, and she had the certified orders, and she had my colonel's signed statement, and she laid them on the table one after another and asked Bonnie Alcott a single simple question in 4 or 5 different ways. "Did you watch this woman sign this deed?" "Ms. Alcott," Gwen said, sliding the journal across the table, "is this your notary book?" "It is." "Please read the court reporter your entries for the 14th of May, 2025. Alcott turned the pages slowly. The room was so quiet I could hear the paper. "There is a passport photo appointment in the morning," she said, "and a package pickup in the afternoon." "Is there any entry for a quit-claim deed?" "No." "Is a notary required by law to log every document she notarizes, with the date and the signer and the identification she checked?" "Yes." "Yet your stamp appears on a deed your own required log does not record. Can you explain that?" Farrow objected. Gwen waited him out. She had all the time in the world, and Bonnie Alcott had less of it with every second, and everyone in the room could feel the floor tilting. "Ms. Alcott, I am going to ask you the simplest question you will hear today, and then we can all go home. On the 14th of May, did you watch this woman, Camille Bramwell, sitting at the end of this table, sign that deed with her own hand? And in the end, Bonnie Alcott, who was 58 years old and had stamped documents for $10 a seal for 20 years and had never once, I believe, meant real harm to anyone, put her hand flat on the table and stopped lying. I never met that woman," she said, and she looked at me when she said it, and her chin was trembling. Marlene brought me the page already signed. She said her son needed help protecting the family house from a daughter-in-law who had abandoned them. I felt sorry for her. I stamped it. I should not have. There was no signer in front of me. I have thought about it every day since, and I am ashamed. She took a breath. That is not my signature line's purpose. I am sorry. My heart did not race. It went very still, the specific stillness of a thing you have carried finally being set down. A notarized lie had just, in its maker's own trembling voice, unnotarized itself. Across the table, Farrow stopped writing. He set his pen down very carefully, the way you set down something you have decided not to pick up again, and he looked at the transcript in front of him, and then he looked at his own 2 clients in his mind, I imagine, and did the arithmetic that lawyers do. A deed with a forged signature, a notary who swore under oath she never witnessed it, a grandmother's own text message setting the date of the crime, a soldier's certified orders placing her on another continent. There is no cross-examination in the world that unwinds all of that. I watched a competent man understand that his case had just died on the table in front of him, and that the only remaining question was how much it would cost his clients to keep pretending otherwise. Gwen did not smile, because she was a professional, and the reporter was typing, but under the table, out of the camera, she pressed 2 fingers once against my wrist. On the record, she said only, "Thank you, Ms. Alcott. Let the transcript reflect the witness's answer." The deed had been a wall between me and my children and my home. Bonnie Alcott had just reached down and pulled out the bottom brick, and I could hear, in the quiet of that conference room, the whole thing beginning to lean. The reckoning, when it came, was not a thunderclap. It was a lawyer deciding not to drown. We had a combined hearing set, the eviction and my motion to cancel the deed and restore possession, and the question of where the twins would sleep, all of it stacked in front of Judge Helena Ammons on a Thursday morning. I had imagined, in the motel, on the nights I could not sleep, a great scene. I had imagined Marlene's face when the truth landed, and Derek forced to look at me at last, and some ringing sentence from the bench that would make the whole thing feel like justice. That is not how the truth usually wins. The truth usually wins the way water wins, quietly and all at once, and lower than you expected. I dressed carefully that morning, not in a suit, the way you might expect. I wore my service uniform, pressed, my rank on my shoulders, my hair in the regulation bun I had worn for 16 years, because I had decided that if a court was going to hear a story about an unstable woman broken by war, it was going to have to tell that story to a major of the United States Army sitting up straight in the second row. And the story was going to feel ridiculous in her presence, which is exactly what it was. Gwen laid the exhibits out on the table in the order she had promised: the certified orders, the manifest, the colonel's signed statement, the title search, the mortgage statements, the text messages, printed large, the notary's journal with its missing entry, and the deposition transcript tabbed with Bonnie Alcott's own words underlined. 12 boring, provable, factual points about a piece of paper, exactly as she had said. It made a quiet, damning little library on the table, and it did not need a raised voice to be read. The morning of the hearing, Pharaoh asked to speak with the judge and Gwen in the hallway. I watched through the small window in the courtroom door. I saw him gesture with the deposition transcript in his hand. I saw him look at the certified orders and the notary's journal and the colonel's signed statement laid out in a row on the bench. And I saw the exact moment a competent lawyer understood that he was holding a losing hand and that continuing to play it would cost his clients far more than folding would. He went back and spoke low and fast to Marlene in the second row, and whatever she said back, he shook his head at it. Once, the way you refuse a thing that would sink you both. When we went on the record, it was brief. Your Honor, Pharaoh said, given developments in the record, and after consultation with my clients, we will stipulate. My clients withdraw any claim of ownership and will consent to cancellation of the recorded quitclaim, and they withdraw the petition regarding the mother's fitness. No gavel slam. No gasp from a gallery, because there was no gallery, only a court reporter and a bailiff and my friend Dana in the back row in her civilian clothes with her hands folded like she was in church. Just a lawyer choosing, in careful words, not to drown. Judge Ammons read the stipulation, and then she looked over her glasses at Marlene and Derek for a long moment. And then she spoke to the record. The quitclaim deed, dated the 14th of May, 2025, is void and will be expunged, she said. Possession of the residence is restored to Major Bramwell, its lawful owner, tonight. The children will return to their mother's custody this evening. The record will reflect that no evidence of unfitness was presented because none exists. There is nothing further before this court on that question. She set the papers down, and she added one sentence that was not required, and that I have kept. Major, thank you for your service, and I am sorry it did not protect you from your own family. It should have. I did not cry in the courtroom. I had promised myself I would not give that away in that room to those people, and I did not. This was never about winning. I need you to understand that, because there is a version of me that could have wanted blood, and I understand her, and I let her go. It was about going home with my babies and a name no lawyer could put the word unfit next to ever again. In the hallway afterward, Derek finally looked at me. He had run out of places to not look. I did not think she would go this far, he said. I thought it would just be, I don't know, pressure to make you agree. You changed the locks, Derek, I said. You typed a text about my hospital room. Do not tell me what you did not think while you were doing it. He had no answer because there was none, and Marlene stood a little behind him, silent for the first time in the whole ordeal, holding a purse in front of her like a shield that had stopped working. She looked at me and opened her mouth once, and I think she meant to say something about the children, some last claim, and then she saw my face and understood that there was no version of the next sentence that would help her, and she closed her mouth again. It was the only wise thing I ever watched her do. They handed me back my own keys that evening in a plain paper envelope at the direction of the court, and I have never in my life held anything at once so heavy and so light. Dana drove me and the twins back to the house that had been mine all along. The new deadbolt was still in the door, bright and unscratched, and I stood on the step in the last of the evening light and used the key the locksmith had cut for me that afternoon. At my order, paid for with my money, it turned. Of course it turned. I carried my children across my own threshold, and I walked through every room, and I put the reading chair back where it belonged, and I slept that night in my own bed with a baby on either side of me and the doors locked from the inside for the first time in a very long time. Months later, a prosecutor called me and offered me revenge, and I said no. There was a real case to be made, she explained. A forged deed is a felony. A false statement to a court is a felony. The text messages, the notary's sworn recantation, the certified orders, all of it built a clean path to charges against Marlene and a harder question about Derek. I could push. I could, the prosecutor said, and I heard in her voice that a part of her wanted me to. Watch them both face the worst the law allowed. I sat with the phone for a while before I answered, on my own porch, in my own house, with the deed to that house restored and clean in a drawer inside. The strongest thing I did all that year was not the thing that would have felt the best. Bonnie Alcott had written me a letter by then, in careful handwriting on lined paper, saying she had surrendered her notary commission and would never hold one again, and that she thought about my children every day, and that if her telling the truth had helped even a little, it was the only good thing to come out of the worst mistake of her working life. I believed her. There is a difference between the person who builds the lie and the person who is talked into holding one corner of it, and I have never been interested in punishing the second kind as if she were the first. I told the prosecutor I would support the charges against the notary being resolved with the recantation and a suspended arrangement because Bonnie Alcott had been used and had told the truth when it counted and had already begun to make it right. I told her I did not want to send the grandmother of my children to prison, not because Marlene deserved mercy, but because my children did not deserve to grow up as the reason their grandmother was behind a wall, and because I refused to hand the rest of my life over to the management of hers. I asked instead for what the law calls conditions. A civil judgment, a permanent injunction, restitution of every dollar it had cost me, in supervised, limited, court-defined contact, on my terms, in my sight. Derek came to the porch one evening near the end of it all and told me the truth for once, the whole of it, without a lawyer shaping his sentences. He said he had been weak and afraid of his mother his entire life and had let her convince him that taking the house first would make me negotiate, and that by the time he understood what he had actually done, he was too much of a coward to undo it. It was not an apology that fixed anything, but it was true, and after a year of lies, a true thing had a weight I could respect even as I closed the door on the marriage. "Do you hate me?" he asked at the end, still on the porch, not quite ready to leave. "No," I said, and I found that it was true. Hate would mean I was still spending something on you. I am not. I am spending everything I have on them now. I nodded toward the window where a nightlight glowed in the room that had gone from being the room they tried to keep my children in to being, simply, the nursery. "That is not a punishment, Derek. It is just where the money goes." He nodded, and he left, and I did not watch him go because there was nothing left to watch. The man I had married at the curb in the summer of 2018 had turned out to be weather after all, and the storm had finally moved off, and the sky it left behind was clear and quiet and mine. "We start with 1 hour," I told him, about the children when he asked. "In daylight, with me in the room. That is the whole offer, and it is more than the paper trail says you have earned. Take it or leave it, but do not negotiate it." He took it. Marlene took the same, eventually an hour in daylight with me in the room, and she sat stiff and silent through the first several, and then, slowly, began to be, for 1 hour at a time, something like a grandmother instead of a threat. I do not know if that will last. I have stopped needing it to. Forgiveness, I have learned, is not the same as letting someone back inside the house. It is not a key. It is a decision I make for my own sake, that I will not spend the years I have left renting a room in my mind to people who tried to take my home. I evicted them from that room. It is the only eviction in this whole story that I carried out myself, with my own hands, and it is the one I am proudest of. It is a year later now, and it is morning, and the locks on my door are mine. Iris has learned to climb out of things she should not climb out of, and Jonah says a word that might be dog or might be done and grins like he has invented language. They eat breakfast in 2 high chairs at the table in the kitchen of the house I bought with my own name, the house that is still and will always now be only mine. There is a promotion board on my horizon and a garden. Frances from the Blue House helps me keep, and there is a drawer with a clean deed in it, not framed on a wall because I do not need to look at it. I know what it says. It says the thing was mine all along. The locks are mine now. So are the mornings. I earned both the same way, by refusing to let anyone convince me that what I built was not real. I made rank on the board last month. I stood in front of a mirror in my dress uniform the night before the ceremony and looked at the woman there, the one they had called unwell and unstable and unfit in a document 23 hours after she gave birth, and I did not feel triumph, exactly. I felt something steadier than that. I felt like a person who had been told a lie about herself by people who needed it to be true and who had simply declined to believe them and had gone and gotten the paperwork to prove it. Frances from the Blue House watched the twins so I could go. She cried more than I did. Bonnie Alcott sends a card at Christmas. I send one back. Derek takes his hour in daylight with me in the room, and he is getting better at being a father in the narrow space I have allowed him, and I have made my peace with never knowing whether that is growth or only the best behavior of a man being watched. Marlene takes her hour too. She holds Iris carefully, like something she's afraid to drop, and once I saw her mouth the word sorry to a sleeping baby who could not hear it, and I decided that was between her and the baby, and none of my business. I keep the room I evicted them from empty. I do not rent it to anyone anymore, not even to my own anger. If my story has taught you anything, I hope it is this. When people who are supposed to love you try to make you doubt your own worth, do not argue with them and do not break for them. Stay calm. Keep every piece of paper and let the truth do the loud work while you stay quiet and strong. Your dignity is not a thing they can change the locks on. It was never in the house. It was always in you. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs to hear that they are stronger than the people trying to break them. Tell me in the comments about a time you kept your composure and let the truth win. Because I read them, and because someone scrolling past needs to know they are not alone tonight. And if you want more stories about courage and justice and hope, please subscribe so we can keep telling them together. Thank you for being here and for listening all the way to the end. It means more than you know. The end.